Here's the question we're hoping that you can help us answer. It comes from BJ in Texas. He says, I just watched Death by Lightning on Netflix. I really loved it, but I kept wondering if that's what really happened. Can you do a fact check? So, Alexis, to start, let's provide a little background for our listeners who haven't seen this show. It's a Netflix limited series about the assassination of James A. Garfield, based on the amazing Candice Millard book, Destiny of the Republic. Can you give me an overview of the series and then we can start tearing it apart?
Yes, and I should say that I was so excited about this series that I become this, like, accidental evangelizer for it, in which I have nothing to do with it, but I've written extensively about it, been on NPR about it, now I'm here with you, and I couldn't be happier about it because you have 2 presidents who are relatively unknown in our collective memory. You have James A. Garfield, and then you have his successor, Chester A. Arthur. And they are coming about there's sort of a surprise win. This is post-Reconstruction. We've got the sort of machine that is happening in Washington. People don't go to conventions, by the way, as an aside. It's untoward. It's not it's frowned upon to even be advocating for yourself to be president, let alone going to a convention. FDR will be the first one to do it and he'll fly there and it's a really big deal. So Garfield goes, he thinks he's stumping for someone else, and he gives this incredible speech that is says and I think we would view it as incredible today too. He goes up there, he's a well-known person. Garfield has, he's a bit of a hero from the Civil War, not the hero of the Civil War. He's served in Congress, he's a classics professor, he's not showy. People were less showy then. I think a lot of our best leaders would not be elected today. He goes and he stumps and he gives this speech and everyone is electrified because he says, "This is not up to Tammany Hall. This is not up to the political machine. This is up to the people. This is their president. The president serves the people." And we've got to remember that. It won't be decided here. And that gives people this license to vote with their heart and their conscience and their ideas about what America should be. And that, I think, can be appreciated at any time, but was a breakthrough then, it would be a breakthrough now, and that is what the and but, of course, there's a plot twist, which is that Guiteau, this man who fancies himself a real supporter, a real booster of James A. Garfield and gets him elected when in reality, he's just a person who was a fan, who was, felt I think we could really understand him now as sort of through the lens of what we call the male loneliness epidemic, but also obviously some mental illness as well. And so he gets it in his mind that Garfield, he needs to avenge his own sort of belittling. He didn't get a job. The exact thing that Garfield said he was going to stop doing, which is the spoils system, which is handing jobs out. Guiteau is upset about. Guiteau retaliates. Garfield dies in this brutal way over many months. And then Chester A. Arthur is ascended to the presidency and surprises everyone. And so this is the entirety of the 4 very crammed episodes.
Right. And so my this is 1880 is the convention, the Republican convention of 1880. So we are past the Civil War, but it is still palpable, right? Right. Where the nation is trying to bind itself back together after this unprecedented rupture. And the man that Garfield is speaking for, is stumping for, is Senator John Sherman,
Who we don't
who's the
really remember today, and that's a
we
good.
don't, but he's the brother of William Tecumseh,
Yes.
and if you read that period, he's one of these names that, like, this is the beauty of historical discovery, is that we like we most people know who Sherman William Tecumseh Sherman was, but people don't know about John Sherman. But he was a very a powerful politician. Serves at one point as Secretary of the Treasury. He serves as Secretary of the State. Very well could have been president, except for the context of this moment, which was, like you said, giving power back to the people, right? It's like, and so Garfield, uh, he gives a speech to give power back to the people. And here are my two frames of reference for this, watching this, right? So here I am, I'm like you, I got some historical knowledge. I read the book. I'm watching episode 1. They're setting it up. Uh my two frames of reference that I'm carrying with me watching this are, of course, Destiny of the Republic, which I read when it first came out. So
A while
it's not
ago.
French.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It's been probably 60 years, 5 or 6 years, maybe longer. And Sarah Vowell's Assassination Vacation, where she covers Guiteau.
Mhm.
Um, and so these are my two frames of reference. So let's break down, kind of talk about episode 1 for a minute.
Yes.
Garfield doesn't want to go to the convention. He feels like he has to go. His wife, and this is like watching the television adaptation, his wife's like essentially says, "Look, just don't become president. Go. I don't want you to go. We got a lot going on here, but look, just go, come back, and don't say anything that's going to make you president." What were your thoughts?
Well, so it's interesting. We should back up and say that my standards for nonfiction couldn't be higher. I'm the American history columnist at the New York Times, and I think anyone who's read one of my reviews knows that they're not. I go pretty hard, right? But when we are looking at a creative adaptation, I really respect other people's mediums, whether it's music, it's television, it's movies, and so I'm willing to come to it with an open mind, right? And I think that what this series does and the reason I was excited about it because these are presidents that no matter how well known I get, I just have a hard time getting people interested in them or even being allowed to talk about them. But then you get to this opening scene, and there's a scene before the convention, and that's where they really got me, right? Because this really happened. There was a warehouse, and things get misplaced all the time in the archives, particularly if they're not to do with like Abraham Lincoln, for example. And so this jar falls out of a box and it starts spinning, and these workmen pick it up and they look at it and they go, "Oh my goodness, there's a brain in there." So even if you don't know anything about what's happening, like, of course, I was like, "Oh, it's the brain, it's the scene, they find the brain." But if you don't know about it, you're so excited. And I think that's what's really effective about this series is even if you sort of take issue with something, if it's not quite as it was or supposed to be, you're excited that it's very clear something is happening and kind of everyone can get it. And if you've never seen it, if you don't know anything about the story, you're just like, "What is happening with this brain situation?" And so I think that's sort of this wonderful moment, but then we do get to these moments, like, with Lucretia, and she is Garfield's wife, and she doesn't say that in real life, but she has to sort of introduce the audience to what's going on, and from that moment, I'm really excited because, I have to admit, I'm suspending disbelief, but this is also, like, an amazing cast. Usually, the cast is a little bit funny. Sometimes it's like seeing a bad production of a Shakespeare play during the summer. You're not quite convinced that everyone knows what they're saying. But this was, I think, from the moment the convention you step in the convention hall, there's stuff that's not quite right, but I don't care. I'm just so excited about this moment. It really captures, okay, what are we going to do? Because not only are we at this point in history, but we're at this crisis point in the Republican Party, right? We're at this crisis point in which they need to figure out who their leadership is. And that's something we can also really relate to.
What did you think of the depiction of the wigwam? And that is like the convention hall where this convention took place, also where Lincoln's 1860 convention takes place. It's in Chicago. What like when you're watching shows like this, like I'm thinking of the John Adams miniseries on HBO, and so you see these like interpretations of these places, like urban history, right? Like the place where these things happened. What was your thought when you saw the depiction of the visually the wigwam?
Well, it's interesting because we don't really have buildings, you don't see these kinds of buildings as much anymore, and when you do, you're just not as impressed. But there were these buildings that were across the United States that were, like, made of glass, or they were really dramatic for the time period. We're sort of a nerd to, impressive architecture at this point. But things took incredible effort and time and plans. The scale was sort of unheard of. So you have this convention hall and there are tons of people in there. Of course, there aren't a lot of women. They're going to be on the upper, if they're allowed in at all. You have this excitement, and I was really sort of thrilled for that moment, and I loved seeing everyone packed in there. I was at that point a little bit distracted, like, oh, I don't know if that would have happened. That person's not there.
Well, just pick one out.
Well, I mean, for example, you have Blaine, who is also up for.
James G. Blaine from the state of Maine. There's a couple songs and rhymes about Blaine out there.
Yes, yes, and I feel like he's a little bit better known, but still is not let's say, a household name from this period. And you have him, like, really there also stumping for himself, being really in the thick of things. I really loved that. What was not true for me is Chester A. Arthur, who will become, Garfield's vice president, and he is sort of he's second to this guy named Roscoe Conklin, who's
Mhm, the
very
dastardly Roscoe
who's
Conkling.
like a very fun character, particularly in New
Right,
York, but he
right.
is, not the devil incarnate, but as far as party politics, kind of.
He's an operator.
Yeah, I mean, he's the operator, not
Yeah.
only on a local level in New York, which does control, it's always been a capitalist city, but and so, of course, it's going to have its claws in DC, but you have him really, it was a little bit more artful, a little bit more removed, but you have him there, in almost every scene, really as if he is like a chief of staff. And you have, you have also, so you have Conklin, and then you have Chester A. Arthur.
Well, before we get to Arthur,
Yes.
by the way, and for people who are listening, you can't see this, but my good friend David Childers, who some of you know, he's a great musician. He paints the figures and he does the war reenactments with the things. And years ago, every year he sends me a few. And years ago, I'm
Oh,
holding this to the camera. There is Chester A. Arthur, right there. He is. He only sent me Taft and Arthur. So anyway,
that's a really interesting,
yeah,
those are
I don't know. Hopefully he's not trying to send me some kind of a message, but I don't think he is. But uh, we're gonna get to Arthur in a minute because
okay.
he's a big. We really need to break
Love art.
because most of the when I read on social media or people have reached out to me, and I had people texting me, did he really blah blah blah? So we'll get to that in a second because that seemed to be the biggest one for everybody. And by the way, Nick Offerman I think he did a great job as Chester Arthur. And he's an old friend to me and James because he was our Andrew Jackson in our Founding Son, John Quincy Adams, the series. So like really awesome, great actor, and we know he loves history, and so it was really great to see him in that role. And he did a great job. Okay, Conkling. He is definitely, whoever wrote this, and I'm sorry I don't have the screenplay writer's name at my disposal, but whoever adapted this for the screen, you got to have a bad guy, and Conkling is the bad guy.
He's such a good bad guy.
He's a great bad guy, and when I've read this period of history, he is kind of the you kind of do sense he's a little slimy.
Oh, yes. I mean, you do not want your fate in his hands. You don't want
No.
anything in his hands.
So talk about him, who he was for a second,
Yes.
and then how he's depicted, and is there any distance between?
So he runs this place called Tammany Hall, which is a political machine out of New York that runs everything. And basically, if you want a job, if you want a service, if you want in any way to benefit from the government, you have to go through this guy. And it's not like a nice request. It's not what we see with like Lincoln and all these other movies where you have office seekers coming. This is a really normal, really frustrating part of an early president's job. Is sort of like, who am I going to give job to? How much time do I have to give these people? But with Roscoe Conklin, you have to go in, you have to know someone who knows someone, and then you have to come in with some cash. That is just very well known.
You need pay to play?
You need to pay to play.
Oh my god, I've never heard of this,
Never
and it's
heard.
not like it's happening, like, right now in
No,
the
not at all. It's no shock of recognitions here. And so then you have this guy who has, a lot of trusted deputies around, and one of them is Chester Arthur, who we're not talking about yet, but he does install him in the Port Authority. And so if you imagine, let's take a step back. What does the Port Authority have to do? Well, at a time when shipping is pretty important, that's where all the goods and services are coming in and out. That's a lot of money. If you're looking for some kickbacks, like that's really, really good. It's a sweet position. And so he is known as someone who can kind of buy everything, but you don't know what to do about him. Right? He's, in this way, a little bit Trumpian, where you're just not sure where the power ends and what will eventually bring him down. You know it's gotta be something, somewhere, sometime, everyone's run ends, but you don't know, and so he does seem kind of impervious to the laws of the land and all the different sort of, basics that appeal and apply to everyone else.
We should note that, the role of Roscoe Conkling is played by the actor Shea Wiggum.
The whole cast was so good. I mean, it was just unbelievable. Everyone was great, and there was, I should say, also sort of a darkly funny tone to it that I thought worked really, really well.
Yeah, like, how do you feel about, sometimes I don't like this, and meaning 95% of the time, even though I'm a musician. I don't like, modern music in period films. I don't like it. I don't like I do not dig it. I do not dig it. It turns me off. I wasn't as offended in this for some maybe I'm getting old and I'm just, getting accepting of some things. But they do a lot of that. Like they are trying to and I give them it's I understand why because here you're telling a story about 19th century politics. And by the way, if you want to read some crazy 19th century politics, read New York City politics of the 19th century with the Tammany Hall and the Albany Regency and the Bucktails and the Loco Focos and the Barn Burners. I mean, they've got the best nicknames, and it's some crazy, crazy politics. And this is what the stew that Roscoe Conkling and Chester Arthur kind of come out of.
And there's the visual too, and I agree with you, and it's hard. I know if they had said something like "dude," I would be I would have a problem, but they certainly with language, it was not the parlance of the time, but I felt like what they were doing was made to make it more readily understood by people who were watching, and, my feeling always as a historian and the way I get good with all of this is I basically say, well, it's not the end game. What we hope is people who didn't know about Garfield and Arthur, which is I think a lot of people, are going to hopefully, in my mind, view this as a jumping off point.
Right,
So they
exactly.
start there and then they're going to go elsewhere. Um, I think also though what I d and what I try to do is think, well, okay, yes, some of that was a little bit silly. It wasn't quite Marie Antoinette, where it was kind of a, I don't know, almost the Ramones or something like some
Right, right.
hate that it wasn't quite that bad, but what I did really appreciate is they stayed true to the things that were important to me. This was not my biggest issue. I'll tell you what my biggest issue is in a second, but the thing that I did love was, the hair during this time, like, everyone with hirsute, they all had these incredible, and Chester Arthur in particular had, like, the best mutton chops and just facial hair, weird beards, like, it's almost like a beard, like a chin would leave the coalition beard, all sorts of things were going down at that time, and their dress was sometimes very what they would call dandified, right? So they were
Conkling's a dandy for
for
sure.
sure, and actually, Chester Arthur had something like 75 pairs of pants and 4 shirts, and that's the fact that really I turn in my head about, I don't know, every few months.
And that rivals Martin Van Buren, who
Yes,
also was really into the way he dressed and was a dandy in
and
his
also had great mutton chops.
and
Yeah,
had big mouth
yes,
chops.
and was in New York, sort of part of this machine. So you have all this. So I didn't mind that as much. I figured, okay, I get the general vibe. I'm gonna forgive it. I will say that sometimes I felt like, oh my goodness, this is just a lot packed in. My problem was not how they spoke, but sometimes, and I'm still on the fence about this, and I know it's Candice Millard who is the author and the historian. We spoke, and she's not. She liked it. So I have to like accept it's her baby. So we feel when you write nonfiction, it's not like you didn't invent these people, so while you feel really protective over them, you also realize, like, they don't belong to you. They belong to everyone, which is how it is with a book, they're kind of like children, they just go off to school a little bit earlier, you see them on socials, you hope that they're making good decisions. I think you've heard me say this before, but, like, you don't know, you have no control, and so I think that is something that I feel the thing for me was, if you notice, Garfield's wife was incredibly prescient, and she seemed to sort of know what was going on at all times, had the best things to say. That's because her words, she was like 5 different characters in one. She was 5 women in a trench.
Oh, composite.
Yes, and she I don't wanna say erased, but absorbed one of my favorite, because it's so random and weird, characters, a woman named Julia Sands. Do you know who
Okay, who
Julia
was
Sands
that?
is?
I don't remember her from the book. I'm not remembering
I
it.
wish so. I will plug your book, which is coming out in March, and you're coming to New York,
Yes.
and we are doing an event together, and we will not have time to go do this, but I hope at some other point that I can take you to a cemetery in Brooklyn, and we can go visit Julia Sands' grave and a bunch of other people who are
Wow.
buried there. I love a, cemetery in general. You name a city, I'm like, "Memphis? Oh, Elmwood, let's go there." There's all I'm just in love with all of them, but Julia Sands was wh so Arthur ascends to the presidency, and everyone's like, "Oh, no, Conklin is basically president now." But Arthur, who's a widower, he gets this letter from a woman named Julia Sands who lives in Brooklyn, who's in her early 30s, and she's what they called an invalid, so she is unhealthy, she lives with her parents, she's not gonna get married, she's not has no connection to politics, and no connection to him. She just writes this random letter to the White House and says, "Everyone is expecting you to be the most corrupt president we've ever had. What if you were the best?"
Mhm.
What if you just did the opposite? Just putting it out there. Like, what if you just aspired to be as good as the office in which you were elected? And he does, and they strike up the weirdest correspondence, and he goes to see her at one point in Brooklyn, and her parents are like, "Why is the president here? This is weird. I know it's not an affair, but I'm not comfortable with this." And they have and he really credits it as being a major influence. And so you have just this random person who reaches him, and they cut her out. They cut her out, and they put her words in Lucretia's mouth.
One of the things I do remember from Destiny of the Republic, is that Garfield had a 3-year-old daughter who died,
Yes.
and that affected him deeply as it well, we think about this time period and how many children would die, how common that was. And, we need to remember that it wasn't just like, "Well, we're gonna make ten babies and
No.
5 would live. We're okay with that." No, it wasn't. It was not okay. It was not any more okay than it
Death
would not be
across
okay
the
today.
board. People always say,
Yeah,
"Well, you had a wife, your wife died, then you got another one, that's fine." And it's like, "No, you had to, but you still really miss." Like,
right,
it's a numbers game. You just simply can't exist on a farm without a significant other, which is when someone decides not to marry, like George Washington's the subject of my last book. George Washington's mother didn't marry in order to give her kids as much as she possibly could, and it put her in a terrible position in which she was fighting in a court that wasn't going to recognize her as a human being who had the right to be there, all sorts of things. But yes, so you have a sadness for sure.
right, and a compassion. And to me, watching the series, like, I was like, you know, they really build up Garfield's capacity for compassion.
Yes.
And to me, I attribute coming from that experience, in part from his, child's death. Um, okay, so the character that I received the most text messages and noticed on social media the most people commenting on was Chester Arthur, uh, portrayed by the actor Nick Offerman. And the scene in particular, you talk about trying to draw comparisons to today. Well, who among us hasn't been with a friend the back of a New York City club when your friend is vomiting after a night of partying, right? So we notice that Chester Arthur has an alcohol problem, and he is one night, I guess during the campaign or after the when he's becomes vice president, and here he is in the back of a restaurant or bar in New York City, and he's throwing up, and he crosses paths with Charles Guiteau, the man who will assassinate his boss.
Mhm.
Did you have problems with any of this?
So much. This was hard for me. This was hard for me. So, yes, a lot of it is true. Would Chester A. Arthur be in a New York City restaurant, bar? Yes. Would he be indulging and possibly yes, everyone was gross. Everyone is still gross. These are things. I was at Old Town Bar last weekend. Someone was throwing out up outside. This is still a very common scene in a New York you're gonna see a breakup, you're going to see someone throwing up. This is why it's the greatest city in the world, I'm told.
All the scenes of humanity are being played out before your very
There's
eyes.
nowhere to hide. There's nowhere
Right.
to hide. And so you have so that's all plausible, right? But this was one of the issues that I had. There are a lot of interactions, and I'll get to Guiteau, but there are a lot of interactions that are happening between Chester A. Arthur and James A. Garfield that never happened. In general, we know if you know anything about the presidency, everyone knows that the vice president, as John Adams once called, is the most insignificant role. There have been exceptions, just like there have been exceptions to bad first sons. You know, we have a Beau Biden, we have a Quincy. We don't have a lot of others. I just ran out. And
Right.
so you have these axiomatic things that are true of the presidency, that are true of every era, which is that the vice presidency is just not around. But in particular, James A. Garfield was not excited to have someone like Chester A. Arthur, covered in suit, if you will, to use sort of an image of the time. He's a compromise. He is probably his 100th choice, if that. And so there's very little interaction, but you constantly see it in this series. You constantly see Garfield looking at Arthur and being like, "You're gonna be better," right? Or like, "You can
There's
do
a
this."
there's a good man in there. I know
Yeah.
there's a good man in there.
Didn't happen, and what also didn't happen is this continual, sort of almost meet cutes between Guiteau and Arthur, and one of them happens, there's a scene outside in which Guiteau kind of gets his butt kicked. There's another one in which, they meet at the club. So no, those were really frustrating
So,
moments for me.
Guiteau, can we just establish this, the Guiteau and Garfield, did they ever physically cross each other's path before assassinates him?
As far as we know,
Physically,
it was
like,
yes. I mean, I think so because Guiteau was such a, like, what would they in Clueless, they would have called him like a stage 5 clinger. Like, he was just always around and, trying to get an audience, and so it is believed that he did, but in no way was he a welcomed entity, and, had someone seen him again on the street after such a meeting, they would have crossed the street.
right, right. It's a sad, I've in the book, he was more of he's a sad character, and I can't remember the actor's name. He's in a lot of things. He was in Succession.
McAdam, he was
What's his name?
Mr. Darcy, Bob.
Yeah, yeah. He's really great. He's a really great actor. He did a
Yeah.
great He was perfect for. So, to just button up Arthur here, Arthur does make a turn.
Yes. Oh,
So talk about that.
well, it's funny because you think that it's all about, Garfield makes the turn. You think that it's all about Garfield not having what he called presidential fever because we see so many people and we're like, I always think who would want to be president? But, he didn't sell his soul to get the job. He might have been great at it had he not been assassinated. So that is the closest thing to, let's say, the promise of the New Deal level reform in federal governance that we have from James A. Garfield. He's going to change the whole system. It's not going to be a spoils system, meaning you're not going to just get to pay for play. It's not going to be the the dais at the inauguration in 2020, 5. And instead, what we have here is Garfield has this moment, but then you have Arthur really, taking that baton. And so a plea for conscience from, I think, America becomes a mandate. And the question is, today I keep thinking about with this series is, do we recognize the difference between like moral conviction and the machine that devours it? Right? Because so many people
Yeah.
we see as being kind of swindled, and it's like, I think there is a fine line between hearing this rhetoric, and particularly when someone seems really genuine in it, and, you know, seeing the forces behind it that are going to ruin it for you, even if you really believe it's the best thing, it's still not gonna happen. It's the other half of the country's nightmare.
Yeah, I saw a good friend of mine a couple weeks ago in New York City, and he's a journalist, and he's covered Trump for decades, like back to the the Apprentice days and before that. And he said to me, the thing that Trump knew from the start that no one else ever kind of realized was really how weak politicians are, how weak of people they are, how much of a pushover they are, and also that everybody has price.
Yes.
And that is very the context for this series, of the time, this is why it's been so powerful and people have connected with it because and I believe that you could pull many episodes and as you do this is why we do what we do because you can pull many episodes from history and history doesn't repeat, maybe it doesn't really rhyme exactly, but people don't change. And so you do see these characters that kind of are born reincarnated again and again and again and are reborn and reborn. Um, and I think that personally, that's what I found so powerful about this
Oh,
is
absolutely.
the moment. Yeah, is the moment.
It's that moment, and I think that's true across the board. I think, whenever I go to DC, I testified before Congress in the spring, and I was, it's so much worse up close is the real terrible part. There's just no there there. They're not really serious people, but they're in charge of the most serious parts of our lives. I think that's also true for historians, though. I mean, you name it. Proximity to power can be enervating to you as a person. And so sometimes I'll be really excited about a historian who's coming up, and I'll see them kind of take a job where, they're forgiving, I don't know, slavery, or you will see them do whatever it takes to maintain ties to certain organizations that are fundamentally deeply racist. And then, which is not to say that one doesn't take risks in general, and that working across aisle sometimes is really necessary. So certain things, when I saw Mamdani in Trump's office, there was nothing shocking about that entire interaction. Or,
Right.
when I am in DC and I'm at my bipartisan think tank, I'm gonna walk right over and do an interview with the Reagan Foundation because
And
that's
then
good for history and because we can find points of connection. So it's difficult because then we also have the Cold War, right? In which people who were so vulnerable to McCarthy, sometimes it was because they were really getting in the backs of cars and trying to have real conversations that would save hundreds of thousands of lives.
yeah,
And so sometimes you look at things and you're like, "Ooh, I don't know if you're not the moral upstanding citizen that I thought you were and representative." And sometimes it's for good but very often it's not. And so I think that's what you saw so much is you saw really the oily people that are now they look different, they're men and women, but they're not that different. You see how bendable, how pliable they are. And it does
that's
great.
the word. That's the right word.
Yeah.
Yeah, malleable and pliable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we could go on all day about this aspect of it. But let's move on because we there's another main character we need to spend time on, and that's Charles Guiteau, the
Rest.
real villain, right? He's the real villain because he is the guy who murders the president.
He is a villain, but don't you also feel, and maybe this is because I'm from California, Reagan, there was a point in time when he had a sort of a war on mental illness and mental health, and, he released so many people who were struggling with mental illnesses onto the streets, and then you have a lot of violence that ensued, and this has all been documented and, figured out that this, A leads to B kind of thing. And so it's difficult because you see him and he's funny, right? He's dandified the way they all are. He talks in a funny manner. He's so desperate to matter. He is trying to ride this moment, but he's unexceptional. He just thinks he is, right?
Yeah, it's like he has the big d he ha as a person, he seems like he has big dreams and big aspirations, but he doesn't know how to put in the work to make them
Which
really
is
happen.
unfortunately, as you know, the most important part of being successful is, you have to have a good idea, you have to have a lot of elements, but you have to make your own luck, right?
Right.
The most
Right.
important part of luck
Yes.
is you have
Yeah.
to make it through sustained efforts, which often feel like they're going to kill you. So when you said, before she's working 24 hours a day, it's like sometimes it feels like that. I don't
Yeah.
really the concept of a weekend is not if I need to be there to put out a fire and that fire is someone saying they're going to run for a third term or whatever it is, I'm there. That's what
Right.
I'm doing. Whereas other people are sort of like, I don't know why I'm not the most successful historian in America right now.
Right.
And so you do have to do that. And Guteau, what we see is someone who has these delusions of grandeur that is in some ways so American, right? Again, I'm from California. What do you do in California? You declare yourself to be something and then you are. That's the entirety of the gold rush. We're all rich. No, we're not. There's no one making any money. But you have this there's nothing more American than saying I'm going to do this and we would call it manifesting. And it's sort of there's this line, right, that you cross and that's when we see what happens because you see him basically losing ground the way you see anyone when they're becoming more and more desperate. I forget there was an Andy, there was like there are always these movies about hustlers who are running out of time. They're running some sort of business.
Mhm.
Something happens and then, they're just out of luck. They get
Eventually, the moment of reckoning comes,
yeah,
like
they run out of money, they run out of time, they lose a finger, whatever it is that's gonna happen in this, and that's what you see happening with him, but it's that he's gone on decades, he's convinced his sister that he will be something, she's defended him against her husband and their family, and you just see him running out of options and everyone sees him, so you see a desperate man, blended with some mental illness that's gone untreated and would have been misunderstood anyway at the time, but it's so
and
recognizable.
right, and what was the 2024 election partially about? It was about
Yeah,
what is happening to white men, like, what is the experience of white men
yes,
and this masculinity wave and the defining the role a group of men trying to redefine who they are
right.
and the manosphere,
But by
right?
checking out of society, this is sort of the
Yeah.
interesting thing is so often this has been the case in American history in which a group of, disillusioned men, because men have dominated politics for most of American history as we approach 250, it's just a reality. You have these disillusioned men who have, checked out, but then they find a way in, right? They start a competing coalition, they do something like that. But what you have now is someone more like Guiteau, which is you have people who have checked out of civic service and they have checked out of spaces in which they could meet women, in which they could cultivate friendships, in which they could through real effort because they're sort of hiding behind screens and it's easier to feel as if, well, I don't belong rather than trying doing the hard work of belonging. And it's not the thing is it would be very easy, but then they're encouraged to sort of, by these influencers. And in some ways, we have the commander in chief who is our greatest influencer. We have
There's no doubt.
yeah, and so you have these people who become easily disillusioned. You have that in Guiteau so clearly, and he wants to jump on this train, right, of civil service reform. But then in his mind, he is, to be fair, a rich man, right? So a rich man, like let's say John F. Kennedy's dad, when Kennedy was in school, when he was in college, his dad wrote a pamphlet. Well, he paid someone, Arthur Kroc, to write a
Yeah.
pamphlet for FDR. And then he's like, okay, FDR, where's my job for having gotten you elected? And FDR is like, okay, how do I get this guy to be happy? I give him an ambassadorship. That's what you usually do. But the difference is that, half ambassadors are legitimate diplomats. They deserve to be there. They're very good at it. And the other half are like, they paid to play. and Guteau
Right,
doesn't
the
have.
founder of Home Depot.
Exactly, and Guteau, though, and sometimes it's that you paid, and sometimes it's that you really were just that influential, like, you have I guess in the White House now, a version is Laura Loomer, right? A
Right,
conspiracy theorist, confusing character in general, but we have, Guteau, who hasn't done any of these things. He's not rich. His pamphlet that he wrote was fine. It wasn't influential. He was just a guy who was excited about a candidate, which is like the rest of us. It'd be like, you ordered an Obama shirt, and then you're
right,
like, "Obama,
right.
where's my job? Why aren't I an advisor?" And so Guteau obviously doesn't get anywhere, and then he thinks, "Oh, I elected a fraud, so Garfield isn't who he said he was," but I believe Chester A. Arthur is for some reason, and this is where you really see, because I believe in Arthur, and I know things that I can tell you from Arthur's youth that portend that he will be better. But for the most part, if you're betting on a horse here, it's not Arthur. And so you
Right.
do have this where you see Guteau in this way, come apart, and it's sad, and that's the thing. It's a sad moment the way so many of these moments have been sad. It's like if you look at the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, we have a similar situation in some ways. You have John F. Kennedy. You have these men who really are so desperate to be involved and for grandeur and for greatness, and they just can't be because of themselves.
The tragedy there's a lot of tragedy in the James Garfield story itself, but the tragedy is that he's shot, but he doesn't have to die.
Oh, this is the worst. So
And so this is what I remember from the book. I just wanna set up here, like, what I what the you read a book and, time goes by, and if you don't reread it, you lose part you can't, you just don't remember parts of it. But what I've never forgotten is I think the book maybe opens with this. It's the 1876 World's Fair or Exposition in Philadelphia. And Joseph Lister, so Alexander Graham Bell has a table or whatever set up. He's like at the front of the convention hall. He's featured. Way in the back is Joseph Lister, if I'm getting the name correctly. And he's telling people, hey, there's bacteria and we need to clean things and disinfect things and that becomes like, of course, in a great book, foreshadowing,
Mhm.
because then Garfield is shot and part of the he dies by infection. He doesn't die from the bullet. Is that right?
Yes, and we should know this. The thing was that was so terrible to watch as a person who is this was already a debate that was going on in the medical community from the Civil War, because you had so many limbs cut off that did not need to be, in part because of infection. You have a woman named Dr. Mary Walker, who was the first woman to be a doctor, and actually she had her pension taken away after the Civil War because, of course, sexism. But she is known for trying to stop this. And so these debates have been going on. Doctors have been aware of infections and bacteria and dirt and all these things for a while, but there's still a lot of people who are resisting. Medicine has gotten better, but as in the founding era, I always say the worst thing that could happen to you is someone would call a doctor. You could also be George Washington, who would be like, "Oh, yeah, let me take your terrible ideas and amplify them. You wanna bleed me, which is a bad idea? Bleed me 7 more times because I love to go hard." And so you have this, Guteau shoots Garfield in a train station, very dramatic. Um, but he doesn't need to die. And they don't know this at the time. There are a few ways this goes awry, right? One of the ways is that they could have just left the bullet, would have been fine. Sometimes this happens, but it goes
Mhm.
against all logical thinking. Even for me, I'd be like, I don't know, maybe we should get in there.
Hey, Andrew Jackson, didn't he live
Yeah.
with a bullet?
It's just a better idea in a lot of ways. But they also then at the same time are aware sometimes you have to get in there. So young Hickory, James K. Polk, didn't live with a bullet, but he lived with many other diseases. And at one point
Mhm.
they had to get in to remove a gallbladder stone. And they did that by, really dramatically ripping open his his private parts. And it's pretty gruesome. I wasn't prepared to tell that story, but
Oh, are they also in a jar in some Smithsonian
Yes,
warehouse in Kansas? They
another
would.
day, but it's a good one too, but so it's just and he had a terrible, recuperation as well, and there are lots of moments in which people are not going to make it perhaps, and it's totally unnecessary, and so we have Garfield who maybe could have made it if he'd been left alone or if someone had just washed his hands.
Right.
And instead you have, a physician who is of the old school, you have a team of them, and once in a while you have someone who comes in and says like, "I don't think this is a great idea." Nope.
You're fired.
Nope. The man who is in charge thinks,
Yeah.
dirt is seasoning or something. And so you have this you're watching it and you're thinking this man is being and it's not like, oh, a day, 2 days. We're talking about 4 months. It's torture,
Let's end on a more
not
upbeat
torture.
note. No, yeah, yes. Let's not end on torture. Let's end on what this series is doing for the cause of history and American history in general. It seems to me it's kind of sparked a little bit of life because you have this coming out at the same time as Ken Burns' Revolutionary American Revolution uh docu-series, and so it's kind of it's history's having a moment. You think producers are going to begin to look for, I don't know, let's do an 8-part series about young JFK, or hey, let's do a series about John Quincy. I mean, you think like this could spawn a couple more of these?
I hope so. It would be nice if it wasn't the same people over and over and over again. I've been in all the CNN presidential docuseries, and I feel like they just rotate through, and then we have a
Right.
lot more. Why are we doing the same 6 people? I think what this gets right that I'm not sure the rest of them do actually. For all the issues that I've already said, I would actually take this, and maybe I know too much, I'm too close. I would take this series over Ken Burns's Revolution because I think it conflates and sort of, flattens the distinction between the revolutionary ideals and the war itself, which happens a lot. So we're kind of going back in time in some ways. So it's not really progress. Whereas I feel like this is really progress, and it works because it doesn't romanticize the era. That's I mean, it does because it's just fun in this way that you have great actors and it's like a fun vibe and people are a little bit ridiculous. But it shows the grotesque and noble in equal measure in the way that life does. You see people, you watch TV, you see, oh, that's a terrible figure. That's a good one. And it's coming at you all at once. So it holds on to this like Garfield's got this ethical spine the whole time, even when he's, in an angle of repose. But he's not a saint. We never think he's a saint. We just think he's a good guy who is not solving crimes and everything. So, and again, he didn't accomplish what we hoped and dreamed for him, but we believe he died a good man. And it also, I think, threads Arthur's slow transformation, and that's something that I think is so astonishing at any point in American history, but in particular now. It's like a fever dream, and so I think that is what helps, and I think that what we do want in general is someone who is untouched by the system.
So what you're saying is Ron Chernow's going to write a book about Chester Arthur.
Well, okay, first of all, Alexis Coe should write a book about Chester Arthur.
Well, I was gonna say that, but I didn't wanna be on the nose.
The most exciting thing about this is that there have been so many times where I've said, "What about Chester Arthur?" My agent has been like, "Do you want to make your mortgage payment?" And,
Right.
it's just not happening, whereas I feel like it could happen right now.
Oh, it can happen now. It's happening
It
now.
can
You gotta get
happen
out there.
now, and
It is there might be 3 of them next year.
there might be, and, there's no perfect Chester A. Arthur book. I think, Zachary Karabell wrote a good one. Full disclosure, he's on the board at New America, but we just had dinner, but I really always loved his. But I think that there's a moment where we need, like, a real maybe Bob? Like, we need, like, a really good I don't know if you have another project.
I have an idea, and they're in New York.
Oh,
By the way, last night I was looking up the relationship between Thurlow Weed and Roscoe Conkling, and not it wouldn't be Thurlow Weed fascinates me, but they did know each other, and but that's we gotta we'll part 2, we'll do another one of these, and
as
we
an
can talk
aside, these
more.
names are obviously amazing. I think it's all about just finding a way to sell it, which is the hardest thing, but this is a huge step forward, and so I am happy, and I think I think this is good for America when we don't have this is in no way again supplementing or, taking the place of real history. But if it can get you excited and people are watching it, this is good news for everyone.
Are you as a historian, are you allowed to say who you're working on or thinking about working on before you do it, or are you supposed to keep it a secret so other people don't steal it?
So people this is a personal journey, but I don't really fear about, this is the nice part about having a unique perspective and getting in to the point in your career where you think, "Oh, no, I really no one can do what I do," which is nice.
Right.
So I'm not fearful of it, but I, in general, try not to talk about things that I'm working on.
Right. Yeah.
Not only because it gives me heart palpitations and, like, when someone's like, "How's the book going?" It's like, I didn't come here to fight, but I
Right.
do also feel like the more you talk about something, the less you do it, and it's good to just sort of sit and think about it and work on it and not
I agree with that.
it's like you
Yeah.
disappear for a year and you come back, not with a revenge body, but like a revenge book, I guess.
Right. No, I yeah, and so I'll tell you offline.
Oh, good, okay. Yay.
All right. Well, our this has been great. I've been talking to Alexis Coe, a New York Times bestselling presidential historian. She's got a book coming out soon that she can tell us about because it's like really coming out soon. Young Jack, a biography of John F. Kennedy, 1917 to 1957. Alexis, thank you for joining us again on American History Hotline.
It was so much fun, thank you.